Therefore, as a result, thousands and thousands of Jews were killed in all kinds of terrible ways. And a lot of Jews, hundreds of Jews, he says, converted for obvious reasons. Because one interesting thing over here is that if you converted, you could save your life. And so the people I'm describing, as we'll see repeatedly, who died these horrible deaths, did so because they didn't want to convert. Right? You could get out of it. V'sifrei Toros, Karla Kroim. You can imagine what they did to all the Sefer Torahs. They tore them to shreds. V'asmim Sakim and all the Degleim, the Ragleim, they use them for shoes, shoe leather. I'll tell you again, this is a blueprint for Hitler. Everything we're talking about over here, but happened not in 1940, but in 1648. U'ritzui Tefillin Lochu Lichroch Sab Ragleim, and they used the tefillin straps for shoelaces. U'ksutzei Tefillin Hishlichu Barosh Kol Chutzos, and wherever you walked all over the Ukraine, you could see trashed tefillin, thrown out in the street all over the place. You understand? As a sign of contempt, just threw all over the place. Mishar Sifrei Kodesh Asug Shamber Urchavasayim, and they took Hebrew books and used them as to cover the streets. Remember, you're talking about Poland where it's muddy in the winter. In the rainy season. So you have like little things to walk on. So you walk on Gemaras. Reminds us a little bit, perhaps, of what the Jordanians did with the Jewish cemeteries back in our time. And some of them they used literally as cannonballs. You take a whole bunch of the paper and use them to shoot out over there. Or maybe means better uses the old muskets. I'm not an expert on this, but the old muskets have to have like a little powder thing with in paper that you put in. Remember that with the flintlocks and all that? So they used them for that. The point is that they completely went after anything Jewish with a vengeance and with a hatred such as the Jews had never experienced. What I'm describing over here, as far as I know, never happened before. Right? This did not happen in the Crusades. This did not happen in the persecution such as there were by the Muslims or other places like this. I've heard of inquisitions and I've heard of various types of persecutions, but this kind of extraordinary savagery, which to them was standard operating procedure, was new to the Jews. And he says over here that what happened was that some Jews, seeing what's going on around them, said like this: so let's run to the Tatars. You understand? In other words, here come the Cossacks, and on the other hills, the Tatars, let's run to them. At least we'll survive. Vahikashir Shamukak Prohibich, and Zyotyov, and Bazivka, and Tetyov, Agape, and there's all these communities I just mentioned who were in the area. Mashosa Hayavonim, Lachinish Neper, where they heard what the Yavonim, the Cossacks, here they call them the Greeks because they're Greek Orthodox. They're not Greeks. When they heard what they were doing, they saw that they were being attacked by a joint force. The Cossacks on the one side, the Tatars on the other. They said, if we wait for the Cossacks, then we're really in trouble. Let's go to the Machane HaKedar B'Shivya, Ki Adanu, because we know, Achenu B'nei Yisrael Shebekonstantinu Kilis Turkiya, Rachmanim Gedolim Hain. Because we know that if we're captured by the Tatars, in the Arab lands, in Turkey, there are a lot of Jewish communities who are Rachmanim, B'nei Rachmanim. They will understand the pity and Shavuyim, and they'll get us out. V'yiftu son of Babaman, and they'll redeem us. It won't happen. Listen, that's also tough. You're talking about it several years. You understand? They actually used to arrest them and gather them over here and kill some of them and then send the others down the river to here and then ship it off over here. So it won't be easy. But at the end of the tunnel, there's light. B'chein also, hocha arba kilos anal anoshim noshim v'taf shlosh alofim nefashos. So imagine the picture. All these communities, 3,000 families, went towards the Tatars from these four communities. And they had a chazan like Yosef Rosenblatt, Shmuel Reb Hirsch Mizyotov, Kishabal Kedorim Hiskil Lakoni L'Shor El Malarachamin. And he led them, and he was singing as he came close to the Tatars in Malarachamin, which is, of course, for death. Al Harigas Achin B'Kol Gadol, and he was thinking about all the other Jews that they saw who were being slaughtered. Go call him B'Chil Gedola. And naturally, this led all the 3,000 families to cry like babies. And the author says like this: in Shemayim, they must have heard this cry, because the Tatars then, acted positively towards them, and they said, "Don't cry. What are you worried about?" And the Tatars, who were more savage than the Cossacks, said to these Jews, Al Tidagu, what are you worried about? We're going to give you what to eat and drink. Yishmechem shochtim. We got animals. It'll be kosher food. You got shochtim. Here's some animals. Shechted. Shachtim b'tzon b'kol rov. Eat whatever you want. And we're going to send you down to Constantinople to the slave market. What do you care? We'll get our money back for whatever food you eat. Don't worry about that. Charity, business, and business. And he goes on to say that this is what happened, that when they eventually got to Turkey, the Jewish communities, the Sephardim, ransomed 20,000 people, he says. But he spent a fortune, obviously. This was their response to the Holocaust of the 17th century. And they got him out, and then afterwards, after they got him out of the slave market, then they have to supply him with parnosa, and then you have to supply him with some kind of wherewithal to go back to Poland. So just think of the vast expenses and the organization involved in all this. And he goes on to describe other Jewish communities that went ahead and did this. And so we see over here that this May, is Shavuos time, turned into an unbelievable disaster, which is one of the reasons. It's not the only reason. Shavuos has been kind of an unlucky period in Jewish history. That's when the Crusades hit also. And that's why we say Avarachmim in shuls, many shuls, even when it's Rosh Chodesh before Shavuos time, because the Avarachmim prayer was composed for the martyrs of the Crusades. And it happened on Shavuos and the days before Shavuos. And here also, it happens to be, unfortunately, coincidence, it happened on Shavuos as well. And the result was, whoever was able to get away, at least temporarily did. Whoever didn't. Now, the one bright spot in all this was an unusual guy. By then, I mean the Poles were all busted. They're running away. The great magnates were either killed or fleeing, and they left everybody behind. And the Jews were abandoned by the Poles. The Poles were abandoned by the Polish leaders, except one guy, Prince Jeremy Vishnevetsky. I know it's not a famous name in America, but he's a very famous name in Polish history. Prince Vishnevetsky was the leading landowner and magnate in the region we're talking about, on the wrong side of the river, Dnieper. He actually owned a lot of these Cossacks and things like this. And for some reason, he liked Jews. Right? Maybe because he owned them, maybe for other, but it seems more than that. And the author over here goes and says once again in his very descriptive way, Ba'osa Yom Shenishba on Poland, on the day that the Polish army was defeated and the king died, Kol Medina's Poland Kitzom B'li Roa. All the Poles acted like sheep without a shepherd. They just panicked. And when all the princes on the wrong side of the river heard that the king was dead, that the Poles had suffered such big defeats and their generals had been killed and all their nobles had been defeated and all that sort of thing, the Poles had a complete depression, and they tanked out and they fled, and that's why the Jews were left defenseless as well as the Poles. That they all fled, and that every Jew in the area would have been killed if not for one guy, this guy. Okay? In the midst of all this earthquake, when everybody was panicking, he had Adukas Vishnevetsky, Zecher Lebracha, Imachayel Shalo, with his army. He was the only guy left on the other side of the river, so the Cossacks are all over the place, and he's got the only Polish force. It wasn't a large one. He was a friend of the Jews, a lover of the Jews. He was a powerful warrior, and he was one of the great generals. He never was elected the king of Poland because the others were jealous of him. This is all part of your 17th century Polish history stuff. And he had to flee towards Lithuania because of the Cossacks coming all over the place. And he took with him in his area 500 Jewish families. For those 500 people with the whole families. He didn't want to happen to them what happened to the others. And he led them with his own people like the Bible says about God of the Jewish people in Israel, like on confidence shown like wings of eagles. Till he escorted him to a safe place, and then he turned back to charge against the Cossacks. It was amazing. He says if the Cossacks were attacking in the rear, he said Jews to the front. Right? And if the Cossacks attacked in the front, he led the charge to the front. So no, it wasn't the Jews, it's the women and the children. It's the women and the children as well. So this person, Prince Jeremy, as they call him over here, becomes a very significant figure over here. And he was the only force that the Poles had on that side of the river to try to hold back this tidal wave of the Cossacks and the Tartars that are sweeping everything and destroying everybody. Okay. Now, at this point, Khmelnytsky was riding on a wave of success, as I said. He was a very sneaky and clever guy. Everybody in Europe is sneaky and clever. That's how you survive in the 17th century. Otherwise, you don't. And so, what he did was that he tried to lull the Poles into a false sense of security. He tried to say, nah, don't worry, this was just a misunderstanding. Things got out of hand. But, in point of fact, I'm on your side, really. The king just died. I'll help you get a new king. You can rely on me and all the rest of it. As he puts in over here, and he knows what he's talking about, he says that, where is it? What we suggest to do to his advisor told Khmelnytsky is Tichta Sorim Aduksim Shel Malchus Poland Divri Shalom Emes Dvarim Tovim V'Nichumim. Send letters to the Poles reassuring them that the whole thing was just a misunderstanding. He's really on their side. And say, you're very sorry for everything that happened. Things just got out of hand. The party went where we didn't expect it to go, And you only did it because you were trying to save your life. The other nobleman was out to get you. Now, let's write a whole big thing over there. Lull the Poles so that they won't mass a big army against you. You'll have time to gather your forces against them. This is a political lie. And meanwhile, send messengers to the Tartars. They should bring you reinforcements, and then we'll be able to take out the Poles. Okay? Then we'll be able to go Lios Hasidim Leon Moed, form a plan to attack on a certain day and kill all the Jews and the Polish princes. Khmelnytsky took this advice, and he sent two sets of letters, one to his fellow Cossacks and one to the Poles. To the Poles he said, everything's okay, we're going to make peace. To the Cossacks he said, on such and such a day, rise and kill everybody. Now, here again, the guy who wrote the book is a Polish writer, the Nobel Prize winner. He didn't like Jews. Poles, Vishnevetsky liked Jews. Most Poles don't like Jews. And therefore, it was just interesting to me because I looked at it very closely. He omits almost all mention of the Jews in his novel. They don't play any role over here, which is not true at all. But he gets the basic idea, which I hope you'll see in a second, and we know the rest of the story. I'll tell you what I mean. He says over here, here's enough for our movie. The Jews who had lived in the Ukraine, they had friends. Listen, even Hitler's time, not everybody was bad. You know that. There were some people that were friends with the Jews, correct? So here also, in the midst of all this carnage, these guys have their own sources of information. Beryl and Shmerel and Yankel know Ivan and, Zacharias and all the others, and they found out what Khmelnytsky's doing, meaning they said, we got a letter, or we heard through the grapevine that on such and such a date, we're going to attack the Poles and hit them a surprise attack and kill the Jews and everyone else. And so the Jewish intelligence service was better than the Poles who had no intelligence service. The Jews had a spy network working to get the information. And they brought the intelligence to the Polish magnates, notice to Vishnevetsky. And the Jews sent out their own Pony Express secret intelligence networks. I'll tell you again, here we have enough material for 10 novels, 30 novels, because this really happened. And that's why the magnates, the Poles, liked the Jews. They liked them a lot, because they were their only source of intelligence. And therefore, the Polish magnates, who ordinarily didn't like the Jews, they just tolerated them for business reasons. Now, you know how it goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they liked the Jews a lot. Because, as this author puts it, he's religious. He said the Rebbeinu Shalom sent the cure before the Makkah, because the Makkah was coming. If not for the fact that most of the Poles, like the Polish leaders, I should say, the great landowners and the kings and all that, like the Jews, then the Jews would have ended up being crunched by both sides. Okay, that's usually what happened in Eastern Europe. They didn't like them, and they didn't like them, and the Jews were stuck in the middle. Okay? In 1939, it's not that long ago, 1939, Hitler kicked out all the German Jews who had Polish citizenship. The Poles wouldn't let them in. They stuck in the middle of no man's land. They died. So that did not happen here. And that's because the Jews made themselves of great service to the Poles. Wherever, he uses the language of the Megillah, that wherever the letters came, the Poles and the Jews quaked, and the Ukrainians were happy, getting ready for the planned day. Okay. Now the result was that they were not able to. Let's put it this way: he sent all these letters out to them, and he's saying the whole thing was just, as I say, a big mistake and all the rest of it. But the princes didn't listen, because they knew that it was all sheker mirma, that it was all a big lie, and what he's planning to do over there, and they were able to take measures over here. Do we have the next piece? This is exactly what I'm going to tell you what happened, and before you see it in a second, let's stop it just for a second. This is really true. Here's Khmelnytsky's ambassador is going to Prince Jeremy. This really happened, and saying, "We apologize. The whole thing was a mistake," and all the rest of it. You and I know what really happened. In this story, they just make it that the prince didn't believe him. The reality is he had been informed by his Jewish agents or friends what was really going on, and he was what they ended up calling